Yo, what up? It's your boy, Mr. E, and today we're going to be learning about volume. Now, I know when you first hear the word volume, you might be thinking of volume like on your TV or on your phone, but that's not going to be what we're talking about. In fact, and that is going to be the most important thing that you learn about volume. So make sure that you wrote that down because it's definitely going to be on a test. I'm totally kidding. I wasn't saying anything important. This was just for the lulz. But yeah, volume is taking what we've learned in 2 dimensions and taking to a whole new level. We're going to be learning about 3 dimensional shapes and how we can find its volume. So before we dive into the numbers, let's take a look at the vocabulary words and find the meaning behind volume. So, volume is the amount of 3 dimensional space something takes up. Think about it like in science when we have our graduated cylinders and we're filling them up with water to find the volume. It's the same thing when we're doing volume with rectangular prisms and cubes. We're thinking about counting cubes, okay? So, counting how many cubes could fill up this 3 dimensional space. So, remember, with perimeter, we were counting lines. With area, we were counting squares. Now we're in that third dimension, so we're going to be counting cubes. And what that also means is we're going to be having cubic units or units cubed. So remember that when you're labeling your units. Let's go through the steps for finding volume. So we have a problem here on the side where we're going to try to find the volume. Step 1, choose which formula you're going to use. This seems a little familiar from what we were doing for perimeter and area. You're going to see the steps are pretty much the same. So the formula that we're going to be using is V equals length times width times height. You might also see on your star chart one that says V equals big B times H. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But for now, let's use length times width times height. Step 2, identify what information you know and what information you don't know. So we haven't been given the volume, but we have been given the length, the width, and the height. One thing you're going to learn is because a rectangular prism and cube can be like flipped around and the numbers can change, it really doesn't matter which numbers go where. But we'll stick to these numbers for right now, and we're going to commit to that. Step 3, plug in the information you know and solve the equation. So we're going to put the question mark for volume. We're going to use the triangle method here, one step at a time, to get our answer of 105. Replace the unknown variable with your answer to check your work will be the next step. And we can see over here, as long as we do 105 on both sides, we're going to get a good answer. And then the very last thing we need to make sure we do is we need to make sure we label our units. I've been really harping on you guys about that. It's super duper important. So volume equals 105 feet cubed, or cubic feet. You can kind of go both ways with that. So very, very similar to how we answered perimeter and area. We're just going to be working in that third dimension, so we're going to be working with cubic units. Let's go ahead and practice a couple problems together. All right, still working with this new annotating software. Let's hope it goes a little bit better today. So we're trying to find the volume of this rectangular prism. So first thing we need to do is identify the formula we're going to use. And we're going to use V equals length times width times height. Okay? V equals length times width times height. Went a little high there, but we're started off at least okay. Now we're going to identify the things we know and the things we don't know. So we don't know the volume, so we're going to put a question mark by it. Oh yeah, you got to make a little bubble for that. We know that the length is going to be 4. We know that the width is going to be 5. And we know that the height, or how tall the rectangular prism, will be 10. Okay? Now that we've filled those in, we're going to replace the letters with the numbers. So, question mark equals 4 times 5 times 10. Now, with PEMDAS, we do like to go from left to right, but if I really wanted to, since it's multiplication, I can go in any order I want. But I'm going to follow the rules of PEMDAS, and we're going to do that, okay? So, we've got 4 times 5, that's going to give us 20. Before we do any more math, we're going to rewrite the rest of our equation. This is getting a little easier for me. That is awesome. All right, and then 20 times 10 will give us 200. And it looks like we're going to get a good answer here, okay? Now remember, we do want to make sure that we are labeling our units. So V is going to equal 200 meters cubed, or you could say cubic meters. So the volume of this rectangular prism would be 200 meters cubed. All right, our next problem, we actually don't have a picture, and that's how some of your problems are going to look like. It says, what is the volume of a rectangular prism who has a length of 11 yards, a width of 6 yards, and a height of 8 yards? So we might get a problem like this, or we don't really have the picture, but we could always draw the picture if we wanted to, okay? I think that's a great idea, so I'm going to kind of show you guys how we would draw a rectangular prism, okay? So the way I draw it is I like to draw one rectangle, and then I draw an overlapping rectangle, and then I just connect the vertices. Not the most beautiful rectangular prism in the world, but it'll do for now. So we'll make this 8 yards, we'll make this 6 yards, and we'll make this 11 yards. Again, doesn't really matter which one you make because we're working with multiplication. And multiplication is commutative and we can move it around. So we're going to choose our formula. So V equals length times width times height. We don't know the volume, okay? We know that the length is going to be 11. The width is going to be 6. And the height is going to be 8. Now we replace what we know with the letters. So we're going to go question mark equals 11 times 6 times 8. So 6 times 11 would give us 66 times 8. Now this one's going to be a little trickier because 66 times 8 is probably not something we can do in our head. So I'm going to come over to the side, stack my numbers up, and do standard algorithm. So we're going to get 48, and then 48 plus 4 would give us 52. So question mark equals 528. Last step, we need to make sure that we do label our units. So volume equals 528 yards cubed. Or you could have written cubic yards, okay? I like to write it like this, but there's definitely more than one way to do it. So finding volume isn't really too hard. It's a lot like finding the perimeter or finding the area where we're multiplying. We're just adding that third dimension in to get that final part, okay? Now, one more thing that I wanted to mention to you guys is I've loved how eager some of you guys have been about how do we find the perimeter area volume of other types of shapes, like this one. Now, I love how eager you are, but we're going to learn about that way later down the line, okay? So trust me, you will figure out these formulas and you'll figure out how to solve them. But for right now, let's just worry about rectangles, squares, rectangular prisms, and cubes. I hope you enjoyed this video. Hopefully you'll get some practice with volume so that you can get a hundo on your next test. Keep learning, Elsbros.